Good evening, fight fans. We are back on the History of Boxing podcast. We are up to chapter 11, the finale of our Four Kings of Boxing historical survey. And we are closing up shop with Uno Mas, which comes after No Mas, which comes after the Mas is a Mas, of course. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And joining me tonight is the fifth king. Who the king? Pat the king, yo. What's up, Pat?
Just like Matasayahu, I'm a king without a crown. We started this with when we started covering the fights themselves. The first was Leonard Duran, and now the last is Leonard Duran.
Yep, this is it, the final chapter. You know, we did. This is the third series that we've done. We did the history of heavyweight boxing, and that was mostly because there was this ongoing debate about, how do the current heavyweights stack up against the heavyweights of yore, and the answer was not well. And then we took, about a year and a half or so to talk about why that was the case, and we went through all of the heavyweight champions from the Jack Johnson days all the way up to Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. And then it was like, okay. Then we started talking about WrestleManias, and we looked at the history of WrestleMania and how we got from where things started to where they ended at WrestleMania 20. And here we are again, concluding our third historical series, doing deep dives into a particular part of sports history. And I mean, there are millions and millions of iterations and things we could have looked at. We just happen to like boxing, and you're super knowledgeable about it. I'm merely the student. But
I don't know about super knowledgeable, but I'll take it.
You're my hero, Pat. You're a jukebox hero, as we all know. I asked you at the end of the history of heavyweight boxing, and then again at the end of the mania of WrestleMania. I want to start with this before we even get into Leonard Duran III. I just kind of want to start the show where we ended the last two. In your examination, in your survey of the four kings of boxing, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Durán, who once knocked out a horse.
The last time for that one, folks. Isn't it sad?
Yeah, I can't say the thing anymore. Tommy the Hitman Hearns, and always the bridesmaid, never the bride, Marvin Hagler. This was stuff you knew. There was stuff you needed to research. But ultimately, throughout this process, you've had to re-examine these things to one degree or another. What have you gotten from this particular experience? I mean, I know for me, I was learning this stuff for the very first time. I knew of Sugar Ray Leonard. I'd heard the names of Marvin Hagler and Tommy Hearns before, but I really didn't know anything about this history of boxing. So for me, my takeaway from it was I learned about the four pillars that were holding up boxing during the Forgotten Sons era, like we talked about when this first started. My question to you is, what did you get from this experience?
It's always fun to go back and look at, because I grew up really my boxing fandom in the live sense didn't really kick in heavy until I was like 11, 12 years old. And so at that point, we're talking, in the mid to late 90s, the era of like De La Hoya, Roy Jones Jr., and that crowd in terms of pound for pound guys. But growing up, like I had always heard these names, and it was one of those things where I had to go back and watch these guys and figure out what was so great about them, and and the fights between them. And it really kind of, especially now with so many fragmented titles and guys who are legitimately pound for pound level fighters in boxing in the same weight division, but we're not getting fights between them. It's such a different experience to go back and see these four guys who are not just four pound for pound guys at the time, but would become four of the all-time greats in the history of the sport, and just fighting each other at every turn, putting their greatness on the line. And regardless of promoters or this interest or this pay-per-view and whatever, we were getting the best guys against each other, even though it wasn't instantaneous. We started this series. The first fight between any of these guys is in 1980. the last fight between any of these guys is 1989. And it's a lot of people refer to this as the last great golden era of boxing, and it's largely due to these four guys that we're talking about and have been talking about, and some others along in that same era. But when you don't often get these four all-time great talents floating all around the same weight classes, fighting and willing to fight each other and do it multiple times over the course of a decade. The closest we've come since then, there was an era in that late 90s, early 2000s where you had Oscar De La Hoya, Felix Trinidad, Shane Mosley, and Fernando Vargas all kind of hovering around each other. We didn't get all of them to fight each other. You know, a couple of those guys were proven to not be all-time greats, even though they were seen as elite level at the time. And even though a couple of those fights were instant classics and there was a lot of controversy around, you know, two of them, it just didn't reach the same level as these guys did, even though a lot of these fights we get after these guys are in their respective primes. And it's just incredible to think about in hindsight.
Would you compare like the Four Kings to Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, and Mike Tyson? There is no fourth boxer in there. It's just those three. They all three fought each other. And I'm asking that question specifically, and then we can get into the notes on this fight. Because one of the things that we talked about was in many cases, like by the time Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard get to each other, it's probably a little past its due date. You know, but at this point that we're going to talk about tonight, this, you know, Unamas fight, Roberto Duran, while he has a great comeback against Iran Barkley, and we'll talk about that, he's also, by the time we get to this third fight, like Roberto Duran's on the downside of his career. Like it's one last shot at glory, but it's not a great one, as we'll talk about. You know, so many, in some cases, these fights, they're in their primes, and in some cases they pass their prime, which again reminds me of Holyfield Tyson, Holyfield, and Tyson Lennox Lewis. And I don't remember totally if Holyfield Lennox Lewis was closer to their primes than not. But I did want to get your that seems to be the one combination I can think of in modern boxing to where you're as close as you're going to get to the best of the best fighting each other as close to the primes as they can since the Four Kings.
I'm trying to think of what you could use to maybe argue that. Maybe like the collection of like Mayweather, Pacquiao, Marquez, Hatton, even though we never got a Marquez Hatton fight. And, you know, very clearly when Mayweather Marquez happened, it was very much a mismatch. Maybe that. But, you know, it's very, again, like we talked about, a collection of all-time greats at the same time in the same place and willing to actually fight each other and again, do it multiple times. I mean, Lewis and Holyfield fought twice because they had to, because the first fight was a draw.
Yeah.
You know, Tyson and Lewis fought once. Holyfield and Tyson fought twice, largely because the first was such an unexpected result, and then all hell broke loose in the second fight. And honestly, I think even though he was older, I think Lewis was a guy who reached his prime later because of technical adjustments he made. I think he was the only one of these guys in their actual prime when any of them fought any of each other. I think Holyfield and Tyson were both past their respective primes when they fought each other, and I think Tyson and Holyfield were both past their respective primes when they fought Lewis. Although to be fair to Lewis, Holyfield held 2 out of 3 heavyweight available championships at the time they fought.
Yeah, and then you look at modern. Last comment, and then I'm going right into the notes. You look at like where things are now in terms of heavyweights. You know, Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder fought each other 3 times over the course of a 2 to 3 year period, but neither one of them has fought Anthony Joshua, and neither one of them has fought Alexander Usyk, and Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua have only fought once. You know, it's when you look at the great landscape of boxing and, you know, looking for a period. And that's why this is an important period to talk about. When do the 4 best fighters in any one division fight each other in their primes or as close to their primes as possible? It's this right here. And when you think of it, and when you think of the fact that we're on the last chapter of those series of fights, it happened in 1989. You know, not since then, except for the one you cite, and that's as close as you're going to get.
And it's not for a lack of talent, because even now in boxing right now, you look at the lightweight division, the talent in the lightweight division, you've got 3 guys generally right now in everybody's pound for pound top 12 to 15 in Vasily Lomachenko, Tank Davis, and Devin Haney. Potentially you still have Teofimo Lopez in that division if he doesn't move up.
Right. You just had George Kambosos, who lost all of his titles to said Devin Haney.
Right. You've got all these guys, and yet the only fight we've gotten out of any of that so far is we got Lomachenko and Teofimo seems to want no part of a rematch with Lomachenko. And yet and then despite all the talk between Devin Haney and Tank Davis, neither of them has agreed to a fight with each other.
Right.
Neither of them has agreed to a fight with Lomachenko, and I don't know if they ever will. And again, neither of them has agreed to a fight with Teofimo, or you got 4 guys in everybody's top 20 pound for pound, and this is as close as you get, and you're not getting it.
Right, and you have Canelo, who cleaned out his division at super middleweight, but I mean, nobody in that division came even close to him. Like, what's his nuts there from Tennessee that he just beat? When he on the way to cleaning out that division and cleaning all 4 major titles, that wasn't a situation where the remaining 3 guys that he beat were ever going to fight each other and you were going to have this like classic, like we're seeing what we're talking about here. It was literally Canelo just steamrolling his way till the very end. And then
none of those guys were sniffing the top pound for pound ratings or anything like that. Canelo himself was because of his experience in past divisions, obviously, but he's not, fighting world beaters in that division. It's and not to, try to diminish what he did. It's impressive regardless of wherever you are to unify 4 belts, but he didn't exactly fight Murderer's Row. I think he fought one really good fighter out of that bunch in Billy Joe Saunders.
Yes, I couldn't remember his name, Billy Joe Saunders. Yeah, the closest you get now is maybe a good trilogy out of a pair of fighters. You get a Canelo Triple G, you get a Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury, that sort of thing. Or you get a guy who runs the table and cleans out a division. Maybe you get some, like a Shakur Stevens, just an up and comer who's, taking belts in every division he fights in. But this sort of 4 guys of equal or greater ability all fighting each other over a 10-year period, it hasn't happened since. And so that's
and one other element we'll add to that, the amount of, in wrestling the term is used, you give a guy a rub, where just by association with you in something entertaining, somebody gets a star made out of it. And a lot of these guys did that for other guys in the divisions that they fought in. Where a lot of guys, just by virtue of fighting one of these guys and either having a real good fight with them or, in the case of some of these occasions, upsetting them, they were made for life in the fight game and they would command good paydays for the rest of their career.
Yep. All right. So where we left our heroes, we last saw Roberto Duran being flattened in his most humbling defeat at the right hand of Tommy the Hitman Hearns in June of 1984. Duran announced his second retirement. He said no mas. After mulling that decision, for just over a year, Duran reunited with Luis Spada and started to come back in 1986 with back-to-back KO victories, campaigning as a full-fledged middleweight. This comeback would be derailed by Marvin Hagler's half-brother, Robbie Sims, at Caesar's Palace with a split decision loss. Let me stop right there, Pat. So what happened in this fight, and why did it go to split decision?
Well, Robbie was a natural middleweight. Robbie was a full-size middleweight, and he was also a southpaw like Marvin, who would occasionally switch to orthodox, which was just never the fighter Marvin was. So they booked this fight because Robbie's brother had obviously fought Roberto, and this was part of a card called the Triple Hitter, where the main event was actually Thomas Hearns defending his junior middleweight title against Mark Midal. And so they had this fight on there. It was the only non-title fight of the bunch, but it was Roberto Duran, the legend, against Robbie Sims, who still at this point is kind of best known for being Marvin's brother. They had this fight, and Roberto, even though he's clearly naturally a lot smaller than Robbie, is having his moments through the fight, but he has 2 things that work against him. He loses a couple points in the fight for low blows, which seemed very quick on the draw to take away the points. And during the end course of the fight, he very noticeably got tired, and Robbie, even if he wasn't terribly effective, was a lot more active, and Roberto just didn't answer. And so in terms of rounds, it's probably very close, but you add in those deducted points, and Robbie ends up getting 2 of the 3 judges to score for him.
So it's kind of skipping ahead here. The newly crowned WBC middleweight champion, Iran the Blade Barkley, fresh off his upset of the year victory over Thomas Hearns, was in search of another big payday against a marquee opponent. Barkley's 25-4 win-loss record wasn't especially outstanding, even though Barkley's only loss in the past 17 bouts was to the highly talented Sumbu Kalambe of the Congo, who held the WBA middleweight title. The vulnerable-looking Duran provided Barkley the opportunity to be another aging legend while securing another high payday, and to increase his own marketability enough to perhaps even lure Sugar Ray Leonard into a fight. All right, so before we get into this, at what point during the Iran Barkley Roberto Duran fight, what's the status of Sugar Ray's eye? Because I know that we've talked about that in the last couple of podcasts where his eye is like iffy, and it's the cause of a retirement here and a delay there. Where are we at with his eye?
Everything from the Hagler fight on, Leonard's eye is in working condition. He's passing all vision tests. That's how he's allowed to fight Lalonde and Tommy in the rematch. Okay.
All right. So now we go to Iran Barkley versus Roberto Duran. In 1989's Fight of the Year, Duran showed that the old lion still had some bite behind his bark, upsetting the younger, bigger champion in a 12-round split decision in front of a raucous Atlantic City crowd covered by a blizzard that rocked the Northeast on February 24th. Duran came into the bout in his best shape we'd seen him in. Yeah, I watched before we started tonight, I watched him. I watched the video you sent me, and him on the scale where he's like sucking in his gut. Jesus, because he looks so beefy in his previous fights, and here he's got that model's waist going for him. Like he really did slim down a lot for this.
Yeah, well, in the fight he had before this fight, he fought a journeyman named Jeff Lannis in Chicago. Technically, it's super middleweight, so he's definitely beefy. And he didn't look all that good. He lost a number of rounds in that fight, and they thought was maybe he got a gift in that fight, the way he fought. But ultimately, because he looked so vulnerable, it's what led to Barkley's people being like, hey, let's take Duran next.
He used his years of experience to set traps for Barkley and engage in counterpunching opportunities and give Barkley extreme angles where he couldn't respond. There's a couple of shots in this that he takes, Barkley does. A couple of hooks from Roberto Duran where I honestly thought Barkley was going down. Like, those are some nasty-ass hooks that Roberto Duran threw at his head.
Yeah, Roberto just – what a fight this was, man. Mm-hmm. You said it was 1989's Fight of the Year because it's all action. But it's very, very tactical action, and
Barkley doesn't just sit there and take punches. Like he gives as good as he gets. But Roberto Duran once knocked out a horse, as I've been told, and it looks it in this fight. Iran Barkley gets hit a couple of times, and he's just like, "What now? And he's fighting.
He didn't know what was coming.
He didn't.
That was the beauty of Duran, in this fight, disguising those attacks so well. Where he has a little trouble getting to Barkley early. Because Barkley's using a good high guard. He's taller. He's got a longer reach. So Roberto starts feinting to the body, and he'll go to the body, but then he'll draw that reaction and start coming upstairs with a combination real quick. And it's beautiful boxing. And he typical Duran fashion, he leans his head on the shoulder to figure out where Barkley's coming from and where he's vulnerable. When he's inside, when he's outside, he draws Barkley's jab out so he can throw a right hand over the top of it, which Barkley doesn't see coming. It's a guy who is one of the great fighters of all time, just showing you everything he's got against this younger, bigger, stronger, faster guy that on paper he should not be able to beat. And, especially with the thought of Barkley just flattened Hearns. Hearns is flattened Duran. What can Roberto possibly do here? The thought is he's going to go out on his shield, and this is going to be the last time we see him.
Do you remember when we used to do the MMA show, the Fighter Logic? Remember we used to talk about that?
Math?
Yeah, Emma Math. Yeah, where it's like, okay, well, Donald Cerrone beat this guy, therefore that guy beats this guy. And I remember my fondest memories of that show being told by Robert Winfrey, we were all idiots, and that MMA math doesn't work, and it comes down to skill every single time. Just because somebody beat one other guy doesn't mean he beats the other guy. But it's funny to hear like the fighter math in this, and sometimes it works, right? Sometimes MMA math works.
Occasionally, but a broken clock is also right twice a day. So,
speaking of broken clocks, Roberto Duran flattened Iran Barkley in the 11th round.
Oh my God!
With a right hand trap that led to a combination sequence of just knocked him ass over tea kettle. And
right
the crowd,
left hook feint, right hand over the top, boom, down goes Barkley.
The crowd whom he lost when he said no mas was roaring back, Duran, Duran. Ringside commentator Gil Clancy, in veritable disbelief at Duran's tenacious performance, said, I can't believe this is the same guy who took the lightweight title from my fighter Ken Buchanan back in 1972. And that was 17 years ago, don't you understand, is what he said. With that win, Roberto Duran became a 4-division world champion and the first lightweight champion to ever become a middleweight champion. You know, we went through the little introduction there before we started, and not only do we have the best of the best fighting the best multiple times, but these guys set records. These guys, like, every single one of the 4 kings set unprecedented records in boxing. I mean, looking at them, and we don't need to have a long conversation about this, I just want to make a statement. Looking at the modern landscape of professional boxing from like flyweight to heavyweight, how many people can make those claims? How many people right now are setting records left and right that, you know, the people behind them are going to struggle to break?
Yeah, I'm not going to say there's nobody, you know, because there's a few guys out there who are doing some things, but not to this level, not in this kind of company.
Yep. There's certainly not a lot of guys going 50-0. That I think 2 people can make that claim.
Very few.
Yeah. With the win, Duran had his sights set squarely on a rubber match with Leonard. We talked about this at length with the No Mas fight. That is going to plague him to death. I don't want to relitigate that whole podcast. Go back in the archives and listen to it. But I definitely came out in favor of the idea that I don't think Roberto Duran knew what he was saying when he was saying it. And I don't need to go into all that again. But we have talked at length about how I'm sure that fight kept him up at night. And that it was like, I don't even care if I lose. I just need to have that fight. I need to know, Tommy. Like, you know, I need to get through I need to put the stink of No Mas behind me for good. Win, lose, or draw. Go out on my shield. I need to not quit in the middle of the fight because Sugar Ray Leonard's being a pansy. So I get it, man. Like, you know, what does beating Sugar Ray Leonard at this point in 1989 really get him? Who knows? But I think this was one of those where, like, no, I need to do this for me. I'm Roberto Duran. I can fight. Go ahead.
It would free up a lot of space that Leonard was living in rent-free in Roberto's head.
Exactly. That's my point. That's why I went on this side tangent. This isn't about a belt. This isn't about a payday. This is I have to sleep at night. I gotta get past this thing because, you know, yes, Mark Radulich knows Roberto Duran for knocking out a horse, but I'm an idiot. The rest of the world knows Roberto Duran for the No Mas fight, and he's got to put it behind him. And so here we are. After surviving Tommy Hearns with neither Duran or Leonard anxious to see the Hitman again, and Hagler having no interest in a return to the ring, that poor bastard. What's my takeaway from the 4 Kings? Poor Marvin Hagler. I just want to give him a hug. The rubber match, 9 years in the making, was set for December 7th, 1989 at the Mirage in Las Vegas. This would be the only fight between the 4 Kings since the No Mas fight that did not take place at Caesar's Palace, as casino magnate Steve Wynn of the Golden Nugget secured financial rights to the fight. Leonard and Duran would be paid $13 million, $7.6 million respectively. Wynn also tried to pull an end around and sign Duran, who he was confident would win the fight, from Aram, whose Spanish liaison quickly turned him onto the situation to squash it and not do business with Steve Wynn again. Wynn would try his hand at promoting just over a year later with Evander Holyfield versus Buster Douglas, which wound up losing him a small fortune. You know, everyone likes to point at Don King and be like, corruption in boxing, corruption in boxing. I mean, Don King's not alone. You know,
No.
This poor bit. Look, Don King does some shady stuff, no doubt. He's still continuing to do that to this day. But to act like Don King's the only one, like this stuff doesn't happen all the time with every one of these guys trying to get over, I think misses the point entirely.
Don King is just the great white in a sea of sharks.
Yeah, for sure.
Steve Wynn is just, you know, like a very stupid, you know, whatever small shark there is in this.
Yeah. Co-promotions were signed with Budweiser. Spud.
I think this is
Remember
when
that?
it was the Spuds McKenzie era, though, wasn't it?
Ooh, good old Spuds.
Or was it the
You ever-
Clydesdales?
Maybe you ever see the old Spuds McKenzie in Bloom County where they show the panel at Spuds McKenzie pregnant, like nobody knew it was a female dog.
Yeah.
The only television rights snag was that Aram, who had sold the rights to the national government station of Panama to air the fight, was told he would be prosecuted by the Justice Department for dealing with General Noriega, who had quickly made an enemy of sitting U.S. President George H.W. Bush, who enacted a complete embargo with Panama. The little things you have to deal with when promoting a boxing match internationally. Like, who are we at war with? What's going on in the Ukraine?
That would certainly make selling TV rights to certain fights interesting now if they had to, wouldn't it?
Yeah, really. Look. I mean, I know this is the part of our chat that you tend to turn out during, but that's why we talk a lot about like finances and will this movie get into China? They just today, not to get off on a tangent, but they just today said that Buzz Lightyear, the new Lightyear movie, is not getting into China because of its homosexual representation in the movie. And that's going to cost Disney and Pixar like millions of dollars. Yeah, it's just, well, not a few billion, but definitely a few million. It's not going to make $1 billion, not without China. So yes, all of this stuff is important, unless you just care about people hitting each other in the head, and then in which case, it's probably ignored. Another TV station paid the sum Aram was paid by the government to ensure Duran's countrymen would see him in the ring. All right, so for his part, good old one-eyed Jack, Sugar Ray Leonard, seemed uncharacteristically moody and grim. Yeah, I got to talk about this. So I watched the fight earlier today. Sugar Ray's ring walk. Like, I know by this point Tyson's a thing, but was that what he was going for? Was he going for, like, I want to look like Iron Mike? My God, like that, like the 7-Up kid. What happened here? He looked like he came from out of the wire.
Yeah, no color, no jazzing up. He's wearing the what we come to call the Tyson towel, right? The ski cap,
right? That
I think was actually a folded up ski mask.
Honestly, wait a few years, he looks like he jumped out of an Onyx video. He's like, fucking Sugar Ray's like, Onyx is heavyweight, motherfuckers. It's slam. Just smacking up Roberto Durán. Let the boys be boys. Like, it's easy, Sugar Ray.
Yeah, I mean, he legit looks like an extra out of. Yeah, he looks like an extra out of this, but I think it's a lot of it. I think a lot of it is that the perception of Ray is not the same as it was during the 7-Up years, and it's finally kind of being acknowledged by Ray when he does that. We're in a different era of his career. There's no more Angelo Dundee. He's out. His last 2 fights, one didn't sell very well, even though he won. And the other, he in later years acknowledged against Hearns that he deserved to lose the fight and considers them 1-1. So he had one of his worst, arguably his worst career performance in that fight.
Right.
Even though he didn't technically lose it, that people would point to that and be like, that was probably the worst Ray we've ever seen. And rightly so at that point. So now, again, going from there to now he's fighting Duran again. And everybody's up on Roberto because he just looks so great against Iran Barkley and defied all the odds. And everybody's down on Ray. And in a conventional wisdom setting, everybody would be picking Ray, no matter what in this fight. But because Roberto looks so good, you had the people from Roberto's era thinking he's back. And this time he's getting a shot at Ray. There's no fight he's going to be more motivated to perform in than this one. And with Ray not looking like he's capable of the strategy that won him the No Mas fight because he's not using his legs and dancing as much. Against Tommy, he fought very flat-footed, very stationary for most of the fight, and didn't really seem to have the bounce in his step and the slides and the V-steps that he used to confuse and frustrate Duran the second time out. And on top of that, Roberto's not cutting, over 50 pounds to make the weight for this fight in short order. They're fighting at a higher weight, which would, at this point in time, kind of seemed to favor Roberto a little bit.
So this is for the Sugar Ray's WBC Super Middleweight Championship. However, Roberto Duran is coming in as the WBC Middleweight Champion. And there is some hullabaloo, some alchemy that has to go on here to decide which title are we doing at what weight class. Break it down for me.
So, in their infinite wisdom, the WBC, who is the sanctioning body for both guys' championships, This fight is initially scheduled to be a super middleweight contest where Duran's belt would not be on the line. To qualify for being a super middleweight, you have to weigh over 160 pounds, which is the middleweight limit, the division where Duran holds the world championship. So the thought is that neither of these guys are naturally super middleweights. They've both been fighting really around that 160-pound mark. Even against Hearns, in his last fight, Leonard weighed 160 pounds. That's a middleweight, Duran has been fighting not necessarily all the way up at 168. He's been fighting 162, 161, and at middleweight where he won the world championship from Barkley. However, writer George Kimball, author of the phenomenal book that we drew a lot of our information from during this series, Four Kings, available on Amazon, terrific book, one of my favorite boxing books of all time. Thank you to the late George Kimball. George pointed out that if both fighters were to weigh 160 pounds or less, the WBC then has to contest Duran's middleweight title on the line. And the WBC didn't apparently know their own rule. So when Kimball called them on it, they were furious and denounced his name in the press, and then announced that, well, what would happen is it's for Leonard's belt. So if Duran loses and weighs 106, if Duran loses this fight, he'll lose his middleweight title, but Leonard won't win his middleweight title. And it was just absolute nonsense.
Yeah. So I watched this fight, and it's a landslide victory for Sugar Ray. We need to talk about the scores, but let's break down the fight itself. In the script you sent me. Yeah, in the script that you sent me, you use some very, very colorful language here, and I would almost love to read this out loud, but I just want to talk to you about it because I watched this and it made me think about something, because we talk about the Roberto Durán side of the No Mas fight, which is Sugar Ray, as we talked about, Sugar Ray's taunting him, and Roberto Durán thinks of him as less than manly, and so he's like, I don't want to fight this girly man anymore. I'm done with this. And he quits. And it's perceived as him giving up. And the story is, well, he quit. He quit because Sugar Ray was beating him. And he was like, but that's not why I quit. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter. The fiction is what is believed. So the fiction becomes the truth. But ever wonder about this from the Sugar Ray side? Does Sugar Ray sometimes lay awake at night and think, what if he hadn't quit? What if he got mad? What if he hit me like he hit a horse? And
getting it as many times as he can, guys. I appreciate
as many times. You might even say, Pat, and I don't know if you know this or not, but you might even say, one might say that I'm beating a dead horse. I gotta get my shit in. You know what I mean, Pat? You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I do wonder if Sugar Ray thinks about, what if I hadn't been taunting him? What if I just fought him straight up? How does this go? Does this man beat me like he did the first time? And so I wonder how much of this, Sugar Ray was motivated to take, because he had to know, can I beat this guy? Can I, if I stand in front of this guy and fight him, do I beat Roberto Duran 100 years after I fought him the first time? What do you think?
I think if he really thought about that, he would have tried to fight that way. Mm-hmm. I don't think that Ray ever thought that way. I think Ray just saw a win is a win is a win, regardless of how it comes. Based on
well, hang on. Are you insinuating that you think Sugar Ray fought cowardly? Because I watched the fight. I mean, he fought like Sugar Ray. He just didn't do it with the taunting.
I'm not going to say he fought cowardly. I'm going to say he fought very calculated, and fought in the manner of victory that would be the easiest path of victory for him against Duran. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense for him to stand directly in front of Duran and trade punches, because now you're giving Roberto the one out he has really to win this fight, fighting it on his terms.
Yes, if Sugar Ray stands directly in front of Roberto Duran, and Roberto has free reign to hit him, yes, Roberto Duran wins this fight. That goes without saying.
And Leonard, again, one of the things I mentioned that we kind of glossed over, in the time frame from the earlier fights in 1980 to now, Leonard's waist size is the same. Duran's waist size has expanded by 4 inches.
Right.
So you can tell he's been fighting the battle of the bulge. So even if he's in shape, he's not in shape. Let's be real. The guy was in his prime at 135 pounds. Now he's fighting 30 pounds north of that.
Yeah.
And Leonard's a little more built to carry that weight better than Roberto is. But again, you're talking about a fight where Leonard's best chance to win, play the long game. Don't let Roberto get close to me. At no point should I make this exciting. And then he kind of even like turns the volume up a little bit, and he fights pretty dirty at certain points. And Leonard's always been a guy who got away with little dirty stuff here and there because of his name and everything, and because he wasn't outright, doing it every chance he got.
Mm-hmm.
But, in this fight, there's a lot of holding and hitting. There's a lot of low blows. There's a lot of, like, just bully stuff from him. Like, I'm surprised he didn't try to grab Roberto behind the trunks and give him a wedgie, like, just for the stuff he was doing. Because he's doing a lot of that stuff that is functionally illegal. But again, the referee for this fight is Richard Steele, who just progressively gets worse and worse with every big fight you give him. So, of course, none of that gets, warned for or enforced or anything like that, much like against Marvin Hagler, and much like when Richard Steele blunders later in life in Chavez Taylor, Tyson Ruddock won, so on and so on. The guy was an inept referee who got cases at Don King. But, this fight, I think it was, I forget which writer I gave credit to for the line, but the tale of this fight is one couldn't and the other wouldn't.
Yeah. The score of this fight is 120 to 110, which is about right. 119 to 109, maybe. And then this referee, who apparently was related to Roberto Duran, 116 to 116 to 111. Pat, you want to give me 50 words on what that particular judge was smoking?
Wish I knew. I mean, it's probably not in here, but
praying that doesn't get us kicked off YouTube.
What? Anyway, I've watched this fight. If you want to, I use the term fight loosely. I always end up with a score of 10-2 for Leonard.
You know what it reminds me of? Half of Canelo's fights. Not to beat that particular dead. I'm not going to play the clip again. Not to beat that particular dead horse, but Canelo always fought efficiently. When he gets pushed, like he just did in his last fight with the light heavyweight name. Thank you, Bivol. Like with Triple G, even though those were gift decisions. For the most part, like if you look at his run at the super middleweight title, Canelo always fought efficiently. He took his time. He was willing to take a few on the chin. I watched Sugar Ray Leonard versus Roberto Durán III, and I'm thinking, this is, for my money, and maybe you disagree, but I feel like Roberto Duran's off a half a step. He's slower. He's definitely relying on his power, and Sugar Ray is Sugar Ray. He's evading. He's using his superior speed. Even at this late hour, he still has the superior speed to Roberto Duran. He's using his reach. He's making Roberto Duran chase him. And I think if there was one thing that Roberto Duran's kryptonite was his inability to cut the ring off of any one of his opponents. When he could do it, it worked out just fine, and he was knocking bitches out. When he can't, I don't know if Roberto Duran has another gun in the holster. He's kind of like he's out of ideas. Well,
yeah, and I'm kind of glad you mentioned the stylistic thing. The comparison was made, and I want to pull it up. It was by George Kimball, where he said this fight looked like Duran was a pit bull chained up to a post, and Leonard was a cruel boy with a stick staying just out of reach and poking the pit bull and making it angry. When we watched Leonard in his prime, yeah, he would fight at a distance, he would fight evasively, but he would also go in and had a killer instinct to close the show and try to finish the fight, and especially when he knew he was, not in real danger. This fight, in a lot of ways, is what sets the precedent for how a lot of guys perform today.
Sure.
In terms of those super fights, because, we like to glorify the era of Leonard and Hagler and Hearns and Duran and be like, these guys never tried to coast to a decision. They went in there to finish regardless. They put themselves in the line of fire. And this fight is a perfect example of no, this is, if anything, is sort of the prototype for what those guys are doing, for what your Floyd Mayweathers are doing, for what, when they
in 11 episodes. In 11 episodes of this, there's only one Hearns Hagler. One. I mean, really, it's like we're sitting like, oh my God, these guys were killing each other. There's a lot of decisions here. there's a lot of us talking about guys staying out of each other's reach and whatnot. There's only one Hagler Hearns.
Again, look at how many of these fights end in knockouts, and I'm not going to count the No Mas fight because that wasn't a knockout so much as that was a guy just saying the hell with this. Yeah. Hagler knocked out Hearns knocked out Duran. That's it.
We're done here. Right.
Leonard and Duran fought to and again, great fight, 15-round decision the first time out.
Right.
It went all 15. They didn't knock each other out. There was action. They went at it, but no knockout. Yeah. Marvin Hagler and Roberto Duran had a very tactical, smart, occasionally mixing it up 15-round fight that was entertaining. Right. Nobody got taken out. Nobody even got knocked down. Nobody got knocked down, and Leonard Duran won.
I was gonna say even look at like Sugar Ray versus Marvin Hagler, where Marvin Hagler was just wanting to beat Sugar Ray to death, ends in a decision.
Leonard Hearns won, ends in a knockout, but again, that's after prolonged tactical shifts during that fight, and it's not to the very end when Hearns is a little more tired, and Ray kind of really has him, and it's the 14th round. It took almost the full go. Leonard Hearns too. It's not for lack of effort to trying to finish the fight on Tommy's end in the the third and the 11th round, Ray's end in the 5th round, but they don't do it. And again, Leonard Duran III is the least entertaining of these fights. Let's call it what it is.
Sure, but I don't want to throw shade at Sugar. Look, I've thrown shade just like with Muhammad Ali. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid, Pat. You know the deal, Pat. I'm scared. I'll throw shade.
He sees one guy looking like he came out of an Onyx video, and here we go.
I'm scared to throw shade at Muhammad Ali or Sugar Ray Leonard for some of their behavior while in their Hall of Fame careers. But I'm not throwing shade at Sugar Ray for how he fought this fight. Just like I don't, just the most recent example, that Kambosos-Haney fight, where it was like Kambosos didn't really engage. I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with fighting efficiently. This isn't Rock'em Sock'em Robots. This isn't bare knuckle. This isn't Tough Man. These are professional fighters. I think the best example, and I'm going to close out with this, and then we can finish talking about the fight and the podcast. But look at Pac-Man, Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather. 50% of the people that watched that fight were like, beautiful, technical, efficient boxing. The other 50% was like, I don't know why you make me watch this, boyfriend. Why did you take me to this party to watch this boring fight? Like either you get it or you don't. Not every fight's going to be Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder 3, where these two motherfuckers are trying to kill each other in that ring and damn near succeeded. Some people just box and box well. And sometimes Pat Mullin of the Screaming Boy podcast, really, really, really good boxing, not the most interesting thing to watch unless you can appreciate the technique. And so I look at Sugar Ray, Roberto Durán III, Uno Mas, and I think he fought the best fight to fight against a guy whose power would have ended this fight at any given time. I'll give you the last word.
Again, he fought the best possible tactical fight to win this fight and receive the least amount of damage and put himself in the least amount of harm's way during the course of the fight. And this is the thing that people were vilifying Floyd Mayweather for years,
right?
That he's not cut from these guys' cloth because he isn't fighting. Well, you have a prime example of Sugar Ray Leonard, who he was most often compared to out of that bunch, doing exactly that. This looks like Floyd Mayweather versus Carlos Baldemir or, any number of guys who he fought after that first half of his career who had no answer for his boxing ability. So he didn't have to put the gas on and put them away because he's very easily just banking every round because of his superior technique. And I don't even think this is as impressive as that because Ray is essentially, who's Ray fighting? Ray's fighting a 38-year-old Roberto Duran at a significantly higher weight than where he's at his best. And he's not exactly, wowing us with incredible defensive reflexes and stuff. He's just keeping Duran at a distance. and even late in the fight, he does get caught. Duran cuts him open really bad with an uppercut right above the eyes. And he does it again in the 12th round. He hits him again, cuts him open. And that's kind of like the moral victory for Duran, if there's anything in this fight, is that he cut apart Ray's face with some of the only punches he landed. And it's part of it, too, is that when we talk about Roberto not being able to get going in this fight was December 7th of 1989, and it takes place outdoors in the desert, where it was unusually cold. I talked to you about how in the beginning of the intro, Jim Lampley and Larry Merchant are wearing scarves and stuff. They're bundled up. You saw how Ray came into the arena bundled up. In between the rounds, you saw they had basically like a saddle blanket wrapped around Ray to keep him warm. Duran had no such thing in his corner, and they're constantly putting ice water on him.
Yeah.
How do you expect a 38-year-old guy to get going in the cold when you keep doing that?
Kind of just like the opposite of like the Jack Johnson fight, where what was it, like the ring was like melting or whatever it was we talked about.
Yeah, and they put one guy into the corner where the sun was beaming down on him. Ring general shit, man, right?
Yeah, boxing is full of fun stories. Or hey, what was it? It was the one in the Philippines with Muhammad Ali and
the Thrill in Manila.
The Thrill in Manila.
I also think of there's in 1986, Barry McGuigan, who was a very famous Irish champion, fought in Las Vegas in the heat against Stevie Cruz from Texas in the desert heat. Pale white Barry McGuigan from Ireland gets put in the corner where the sun's shining right down on him. So not only is he getting sunburned, he's getting dried out and blinded, and he loses his title.
I wonder why he lost.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this is the finale. This is the end. We are done with the Four Kings. We are not doing another series after this. I am done with series for a while. But in a minute, I will tell you what we are going to be doing in the future. I've had to rearrange the schedule a few times, so you might not even know this just yet, Pat. But we are coming back. We're taking a few months off. But we are coming back with more history of boxing. I'll talk about that in a second. In the meantime, let's talk about our Four Kings. First, Marvin Hagler. The one king who never returned to the ring was Marvin Hagler. His bout with Leonard was indeed his last. While he would occasionally work as a color commentator for American broadcast, Marvin would step away from the game. He and his wife Bertha would divorce, and Hagler would move to Italy, making action movies, good old spaghetti westerns, and TV appearances, and marrying his second wife, Kay. Hagler would split his time between Italy and New Hampshire before his untimely passing in the March of 2021. His final career record stands at 62-3-2 with 52 KOs. Hagler was enshrined into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1993 in his first year of eligibility. He is, to this day, regarded as arguably the greatest middleweight of all time. The 7-Up Kid, Smiling Sugar Ray Leonard. Leonard would lose his broadcasting job with HBO in 1990 after an incident at Wimbledon where Leonard and his bodyguard had given their box tickets with HBO executives to prostitutes they had spent the night with. Sugar Ray. Leonard made his first of two more comebacks in 91 as a junior middleweight, fighting champion Terry Norris at Madison Square Garden for rival.
Can I interrupt for one point on that?
Yes. About the hookers?
So, well, no.
Yeah.
Sadly. You ever see the Piper's Pit where Roddy interviews himself?
I'm sure I have.
Okay, well, I'm going to send it to you anyway because, first of all, it's hilarious. And second of all, Ray pretty much does the same thing for this, where he does a sit-down interview with himself, asking himself questions, and it's fantastic for as long as it lasts.
I think I've actually seen that, but yeah, I'll watch it again. Leonard had nothing to offer the younger champion, was knocked down twice, losing a one-sided decision. In 97, Jesus Christ, I'm in college in 1997. These motherfuckers started in 1980. Leonard would also be inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. He would make an ill-advised comeback the same year against Hector Camacho. Good old Macho Camacho, losing via fifth-round KO in a fight he never seemed to be in before finally retiring for good. Stayed a little too long there, Leonard. Learn from the murdered Kurt Cobain. It's better to burn out than fade away, baby.
Yeah, he tore a hamstring prior to going into that fight because he'd been lifting a lot of weights and just did not work out well for him.
Yeah, so sometimes you need to know when to say no mas. Leonard would remain active in the sport, founding Sugar Ray Leonard Promotions and promoting fights for a 3-year span on ESPN, partnering with Sylvester Stallone to create and produce the boxing reality series The Contender on NBC on NBC, ESPN, and Versus. Leonard lives in California, and in his final career record stands at 36-3-1 with 25 KOs. He is one of the most well-known boxers of all time, transcending into pop culture and remaining a fixture in the sport even after retirement. Roberto Duran, who once knocked out a horse last time. Can we just mourn the death of that particular phrase? That mourn my gimmick. I have to find a new thing now.
Yeah, you're gonna have to look, unfortunately.
Yeah, really, because nothing's quite this good.
We'll find a way to talk about Roberto Duran again. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll have to. I'm gonna have to start comparing every fight to Roberto Duran just so I can say that. And another thing about Jurassic World, have I told you about Roberto Duran?
He once knocked out a Tyrannosaurus.
That's right in the nose he did. Sorry, one of our friends is watching on YouTube and is putting up emojis to match my nonsense. So here we go. Here we are.
Well played, Michelle Brown.
Well played. All right. In any case, beset by financial woes, Duran would continue fighting despite being the elder statesman of the Four Kings. He was a regular fixture on ESPN telecast and was more on USA Tuesday Night Fights main events than any other fighter during the show. I used to love Tuesday Night Fights.
With Al Albert and the champ, Sean O'Grady. That's
right. God, it was Monday Night Raw and Tuesday Night Fights. Remember those days, Pat?
USA Network had it going on, man. And then on the weekend, we had Up All Night.
That's right. And just after Raw, La Femme Nikita. Remember that?
And Silk Stockings.
Ah, Silk Stockings. All right.
Come back to us, Raw Besties.
Duran would headline pay-per-view broadcasts against Hector Macho Camacho and Vinny Pezenzia. In 1998, a 47-year-old Duran was given a shot at the WBA middleweight champion, 27-year-old William Joppy, in a disgraceful mismatch promoted by legendary Hall of Fame promoter Don Only in America King. Duran would continue fighting into 2001 at age 50, losing a rematch to Hector Camacho before an auto accident would cause his permanent retirement. Taken out by a car, Duran. That's the only way to go. Hit that motherfucker with a car. Duran has had multiple documentaries made of his life and career, and in 2016 had a feature-length film about his career released appropriately titled Hands of Stone. Duran's final career record stands at 103-16 with 70 KOs. Duran would also be inducted into the IB Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. He is widely considered the greatest lightweight of all time. And finally, Legs McGee, the tall drink of water, the Hitman, the real Hitman. Fuck that guy from Canada. Tommy, shout out to Gavin Napier. Tommy, the Hitman Hearns. Tommy Hearns had the most success of the Four Kings after the rivalry ended. Hearns would split from longtime trainer and manager Emmanuel Stewart in 1990 after Stewart felt Hearns should retire. Hearns would continue fighting as a lightweight, and in 1992 would upset reigning WBA
light heavyweight, not a lightweight.
Light heavyweight champion Virgil Hill by utilizing his often underrated pure boxing ability to claim his last world championship. He would rematch former conqueror Barkley, but now also campaigning as a light heavyweight and lose, but in a much closer contest, dropping a split decision. Hearns would then move up to cruiserweight, but would face largely nondescript opposition similar to Duran. He would suffer the last loss of his career by breaking his ankle against fellow contender Uriah Grant. Hearns never officially retired and became a promoter in 2000, reaching his zenith by promoting good old Iron Mike Tyson versus Andrew Galata in October of that year. Andrew Galata did not punch Mike Tyson in the nuts 500 times. Not that night
surreptitiously.
Hearns would fight twice more, once in 2005 and then 2006, winning both fights and officially retiring. Like his contemporaries, Hearns would be inducted into the Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. His final record stands at 65-5-1 with 48 KOs. He is widely seen as one of the greatest pure punchers of all time. Well, Pat, that is the end of our survey of the Four Kings. This has been a great journey. I always tell you what, Pat, you know the deal that I am going into semi-retirement of podcasting. I'm going down to 2 days a week starting in August.
And still watching cartoons?
No, as a matter of fact. And be nice. We're all
Never
friends
been more
here.
proud of you.
But I have selected a small group, an inner circle, if you will, a Radulich Appreciation Society, if you must, of a small group of my podcast friends who I'm going to keep around. And you are one of those people, Pat. I will not. I can't quit you, Pat Mullin. I can't quit you, Pat Mullin.
I'm so used to being on the other end of that. Wow.
So, the History of Boxing podcast will be taking a hiatus, but we'll be back in October 22nd, October 4th, as a matter of fact. The History of Boxing podcast will be looking at a fight or a series of fights between two people, so like trilogy, stuff like that. So same format, but we are just going to go from one fight to the next, looking at different fights that we're interested in over the 100-year period of modern boxing. And so the list goes like this. In October 4th, we are looking at Riddick Bowe versus Nut Puncher McGee, Andrew Galata, 1 and 2. Yes, I wanted to kick things off with Riddick Bowe versus Andrew Galata after talking about them during the History of Heavyweight Boxing podcast. We must watch these. We must talk about them. We must count how many times Andrew Galata punches Riddick Bowe in the dick. Because this is important to me. Let's actually
keep a tally of that in all seriousness.
Yeah, I will have a spread. Yeah, I will have a spreadsheet available to show people how many times Andrew Galata punched Riddick Bowe in the dick. After that, December 19th, our Christmas present to each other, we're going to have Gavin Napier on the show because this is his favorite fight ever. Diego Corrales versus Jose Luis Castillo. Apparently, it's like one of the greatest fights in the history of boxing.
Just whistling Dixie.
Oh, this is, what is it, like 12 rounds of these motherfuckers just punching each other nonstop or something like that? I remember watching it back when he was all about it. Like, this is a nuts fight. It really is. It's just pure punch. Hang on. Michelle with the hot take.
I love this. This is how we need to close this show. Michelle Brown, you are great.
Yeah, absolutely. She sent him a bunch of them. When we were talking about like punching a Tyrannosaurus Rex, she put this shit up here. So, you know, it's good to have fan interaction. Anyway, so yeah, Diego Corrales, Jose Castillo. Hopefully Gavin will be on to just gush about that fight. And then we'll be going a little bit more often in 2023 as my schedule settles itself. January 23rd, Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez. January 30th. Yes, sir. Controversial. January 31st, Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Arguello. March 27th, Danny Nardico versus Jake LaMotta. And then April 24th, the Barrera Morales trilogy. And I had to move it. I haven't picked out a new date yet, but we will be doing a 2-part series on Manny Pacquiao versus, help me, Pat.
Juan Manuel Marquez.
Yes, Juan Manuel Marquez. He's speaking about two motherfuckers who try to kill each other in boxing. So that's what we got coming at you starting October. Me and Pat, at least once a month-ish, doing a deep dive into a particular match or series of matches between two great fighters and Andrew Galata. So I'm really looking forward to that. Are you looking forward to that, Pat?
I can't wait for October.
Yes, sir. All right. In the meantime, in between time, this is Monday night, and we've got a whole week of shows lined up for you. Tomorrow on Damn You Hollywood, I will be joined by the Teasley family and your friend and mine, Smiling Robert Winfrey, as we look at Jurassic World Dominion, the grand finale of the Jurassic Park and World series.
Do you tell us how the dinosaurs get to Europe?
I will. Wednesday, Jesse's dropping a Count Duckula #1 review, and I will be reviewing Creator Hate Uber Alice with Robert Cooper and said Jesse Starcher. Thursday, myself and David Wright will be reviewing Pacific Rim: The Black Season 2. We've got re-airs of our Long Road to Ruin Toy Story trilogy. I posted a line. I posted a line from that earlier on Facebook, and now everyone thinks I'm divorcing my wife. It's not. I'm not divorcing anybody. It's just I really like that line, and I wanted to share it with people because I thought it was a cool thing that I said in 2013, and wanted to show people how insightful I am.
Context is key.
Context is and controversy creates cash, as we know. Bang bang. Anyway. We have a re-airing of Toy Story 4 from a few years ago, plus our Hey, if you want to hear Robert Winfrey talk like a human being, check out our review of The Good Dinosaur, where he starts talking about the nature of loss and how it affects him and how that relates to The Good Dinosaur. Robert Winfrey in a very human moment on that particular review. So one of our more interesting moments on Damn You in the long storied history of Damn You Hollywood. That's what I got going on. What about you? You gonna do your wrestling show ever or what?
Yes. So Gavin has officially found music that he likes. Speaking of Gavin Napier. So yeah, Gavin and I very shortly within the next month will be kicking off Best Bout Machine, which we're going to syndicate hopefully through you, Mark. And yeah, Gavin and I are going to take on very big, popular wrestlers. And what we're going to do is we're each going to pick what we think their best match is, and counterpoint each other. We're each going to watch each other's pick for whatever the match is. I want to say more often than not, we're probably going to disagree on what the best match said offering is. And, we'll sell you on why we think we're right, why we think you're right, why we think this is the best match, why we thought that was the best match. Maybe we'll even convince each other along the way that, hey, this was better. And the likelihood is,
if he convinces you of the greatness of Ric Flair, I will be absolutely shocked.
Well, remember, it's about their best match, not necessarily are they worth anything.
Are you going to do an entire podcast series on just Ricky Steamboat versus Ric Flair? I don't know.
Is that the best match of all time?
I think so.
Is it one of the best matches of all time? Yes. And I think because Rick wasn't the best wrestler, he wasn't necessarily the best talker. He wasn't necessarily the very best in any one category, but he was so good in so many that I think he's the best.
Thank you, Gavin.
Neat. Yeah, so we're gonna be talking about a lot of different guys and a lot of different matches. We thought we'd kick it off with John Cena. There's a lot of speculation because he's coming back to Raw. He's the keynote figure of the last year of wrestling. So we're probably going to each pick our favorite, or we think is not necessarily our favorite, but the best match that John Cena ever had.
Can I pick mine? Can I pick mine?
Does it involve the Great Khali?
Rob Van Dam, ECW One Night Stand 2.
Sure, that's a fair assumption. It's not my pick. I'll spoil that for you now, but it's definitely worth merit in the discussion. But we'll be talking about guys ranging from John Cena to
Tell that girl
Cody
on Snapchat
Rhodes.
you'll be off in a second.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. But goes from John Cena to Cody Rhodes to and we're gonna float it out there to you guys if there's somebody you are absolutely dying to hear that you want to see or hear about why we think this match is their best, or offer a match for us to pick on. Go for it, because we're into it, and yeah, we're excited about it.
All right, folks, thank you for joining us on this long 11-chapter series of the Four Kings. If you enjoyed this, and really, why wouldn't you? Check out our history of heavyweight boxing podcast series that we finished up. If you want to hear,
I've actually been re-listening to that too.
Have you? Okay.
Yes.
If you're into me and Pat, you just like the way we interact with each other, you want to hear more of stuff that we've done. We did an entire series of the history of WrestleMania. Plus, Pat's been one of my regular guys for years now. So I actually, our friend here, Michelle, asked me about the history of Damn You Hollywood, and I said, well, it all started with a fight Pat and I had over The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So it really, yeah, It was totally accidental. We just had a debate. We were like, you want to keep doing this? Who wants to talk about Maleficent next week? And, lo, these many years later. All right. Thank you for joining us here in the History of Boxing podcast for the Punchy Pugilist, the Fifth King, Loverboy, Pat Mullin. Be well, be safe, and behave.